Paul here, and Desmond's online as well. You'll be hearing from him in just a few minutes. So thanks everyone for joining the webinar today. When we began discussing this with the Soligent team, the theme that kept coming up in terms of what we both thought was both interesting and important for the industry was the ways in which solar developers are increasingly using technology to improve the way they go to market. And when we say go to market, that means everything from the way you engage with customers, the way to prepare for the sort of pre-customer outreach, during customer outreach, some of the turnaround times when you're kind of in the thick of it, and ways to make sure to get to the close as effectively as possible. And as we were thinking about the trends that have been going on, obviously it's the case that we're in the middle of COVID. So one of the thoughts is that COVID is a big catalyst, but the trends that we've been seeing, and this is from many conversations with our own customer base, these are trends that have been going on for a decade. And basically, the solar industry's been quite proactive in terms of using new technologies to experiment and improve the sales process. And so, there's a couple of factors I think that feed that. One is, while at the end of the day, solar is kind of a contracting business, it's also a technology business. And so there's a good amount of overlap, a good amount of DNA for the people in the solar industry who want to be using the latest and greatest, best-in-class stuff, even the stuff that's on the bleeding edge. Today that might be drones, stuff like that. Like we've seen a lot of our users using drones, and even a lot of that is kind of experimental. Additionally, though, it comes from the imperative that we all feel, which is we've got to keep bringing costs down. We're on a steady march toward whatever you want to call grid parity. And the thing that we often hear from our customers is that the goal is often to be able to grow top line by whatever, let's say 20, 30, 40%, without growing your costs in line with that. And that's often where technology plays. So whereas oftentimes people who are outside of the industry think that it's all about cost reduction on its face, how do I take the widget that I bought last year and pay 90 cents on the dollar for the same widget? That's not necessarily the case. A lot of cost reduction comes from getting more output from the same team, or getting, again, proportionally more output from a team that's growing, but growing not as fast as your top line. So that's a big part of where these tools play a role in the solar industry. And again, that's been going on for years. What we've seen ourselves from talking to customers through this COVID, through this pandemic process, is that well, first of all, we've been quite resilient as an industry. And obviously, as with anything, there are going to be companies and regions that are hit at varying levels. But for all intents and purposes, it seems like as an industry, we're going to survive. For many companies, there's a modest hit, but it's not a massive hit that I think some of us might have worried about. And to me personally, that ties back to the trends that have been going on for years. It's not like we as an industry have been sitting on a single way to do business. It's that we've already been doing a lot of experimentation, which therefore means that we're actually pretty well positioned for the world of social distancing, for the world of doing a lot of this stuff remotely. And then the final point I'll make on that point is that I think for all of us, and this goes for Folsom Labs, the remote work, social distance, and remote sales type of environment also forces you to be more methodical about your processes. And in many cases, those are best practices that are going to be healthier even when we don't have any social distance. At whatever point life is actually back to normal, a lot of those best practices will very likely be locked in because it's just a better way to run things. So there's arguably a very much a glass half full that the types of changes that we're talking about and that we're going to talk about here are things that might be accelerated accelerated because of the pandemic, but are not distractions. They're not things that aren't worth doing even in the absence of a pandemic. It's just forcing us to be a little more methodical there. So then, as one of the themes that we'll be coming back to throughout the presentation here, both presentation and demo, by the way, we've got a mix of both, is just kind of an overall sales process map. And the first thing I'm going to say here is everyone's process is different, and therefore this is an indicative sales process, but I'm sure it's not correct for any single one company. So to the extent that you do or don't do some of these, that's okay. But this is a nice canvas for us to talk about the techniques that we're gonna describe, because basically we've got here today sharing a mix of both experimental, riskier techniques that you might try experimenting with, or just best practices, things that most people seem to be doing, and we can talk about kind of observations that we've had there. But we'll be filtering all that through this overall process here. And as we go, we won't just be talking about the tools and techniques. We'll also be talking about some of the tools that go along with that. Of course, we provide HelioScope, so there's some level of the role that HelioScope plays in that, and that's why we've got the perspective that we've got. So the reason we're talking about it in this way is because we hear from our users every day about how they're using the product, how they're engaging with their customers, and again, the most common themes we can share here. But we've gone much beyond just our own product, so we will be pulling in and just kind of showcasing where other products can be really helpful for that process as well. So with that, I actually might, for those that don't know HelioScope, I'm going to start with a very quick demo. And I say very quick, and just let me adjust my sharing here. And I say very quick because I'm going to assume that we may actually have a mix of folks that don't know HelioScope and folks that do. So I'm going to basically try to strike a balance where, for those that haven't seen this, seen HelioScope in action yet, you at least get a taste. For those that do, you're not going to be completely bored and have to walk away from your computer here. So at the highest level, HelioScope is a really nice way to just take any address and just drop in and figure out what's going to fit for that address. So here, if I throw in a couple modules, trace out a rooftop, and set my settings for a residential system, you can pretty much have a residential rooftop design here in, as you can see, while I'm doing it here with you live. By the way, because of some internet problems here, I'm actually doing this on a personal MiFi hotspot, one of those old things that fits in your pocket, more or less a cell phone. And so that's actually one of the things that will come up later on, is one of the things that some of our users are doing is doing some of this in the field, to the extent that I'm technically in an office, but again, with the mobile hotspot, you can be pretty much at kind of in the car or in the kitchen and doing these things. So again, as I'm talking here, I'm just putting together the initial roof layout here for this system here, and just like that, we can see that given the modules that we want to be using, I'm using LG 320s for now. We've got about 4 kilowatts on that roof. Then in this case, I'm going to draw the second roof surface here for 2 reasons, actually. One, because we want to be able to have the solar array on that second roof. 2, we want to make sure that we capture any shading, because since there will be times of day when if the sun is low enough in the horizon where this front roof face is shading the back roof face, that's already going to be captured in the models here for how we actually design and simulate this. And so just like that, we pretty much have the starting point for our array, about a 6.7 kilowatt system. Now let's make sure we factor in some trees. So we've obviously got a tree here. That's probably going to be a 25-foot tree. And then I'm also going to copy this tree over to the east side, because we've got a bank of trees over here on the east. And then and so now we've got kind of a good 3D scene around our array. And then just to finish this real quick, and then I'll get back to the sort of sales process stuff. You can run a shade analysis. You can get an understanding of what the shade losses are. You might say, okay, well, let's remove the worst offending shaded modules. It's only about a 3.5% shade loss, so it's not incredibly bad, but let's do that. We can remove those too. And then, we'll just pop over to electrical, choose an inverter. I'll go with an N phase, and we're pretty much good to go. A couple points here in terms of just kind of how HelioScope works here. So one is that, here while I'm talking, I'm actually gonna make the trees a little bigger because I'm just kind of eyeballing them. I'm gonna make them 30 feet. Actually, I'm gonna make them all 30 feet. So check out that I can do, oh, no, never mind. As I was gonna say, a couple of things that are important for sort of just kind of getting an understanding of what's relevant about this program. First is that it's, so as you can tell from me doing this, it's something that a lot of salespeople use themselves, whether you're in the office, in the car, or in the field, or not in the field, or just doing it remotely from a home office. You can basically be completely empowered to do this yourself. So that's one of the most consistent and consistently important things about HelioScope is we're one of the only tools often that kind of every person in the company is going to be able to do. One of our users actually was telling that their head of engineering was stuck in traffic and actually talked his 10-year-old son through doing a HelioScope layout for a salesperson who wanted to help. So truly anyone in the company, even in a pinch, a family member is able to actually kind of jump in here and get the work done. On the other hand, it's also incredibly robust in terms of the actual output. So depending on the type of system that you're doing, notice here, of course, I'm doing residential, but also if you're doing a commercial system as well, you are going to care about the actual quality of the calculations that are going in here. And so in both cases, one thing that that our users tell us all the time is they're getting the same output to within a 1% tolerance of what they get from AutoCAD. And on the energy simulation, we actually have the same exact energy calculations that PVSYST has. So for those that know PVSYST, which is more on the commercial side, we actually do the exact same physics that PVSYST does. We're doing it at the module level. So for this array, that's 302 modules. Every hour, we're doing 302 IV curves, including understanding precisely based on that hour, based on those sun angles, which modules are shaded, what's their IV curve going to do under those shaded conditions, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, factoring in all the electrical properties as well. So in this case, I've got microinverters, but if I've got, say over here, if I've got string inverters, then you're going to have, mismatch losses, voltage drop losses on the DC side, and so on and so forth. All that is factored in automatically to HelioScope. So that's the basic, just kind of high-level understanding of kind of how this works and how it's used. Now let me pop over and come back to some of the more interesting things that people then use this tool in particular. And again, we'll have a few different tools here, but first of all, just talk about some of the more experimental things that some of our users are doing. First of all is actually doing an initial design during a phone screen. So what we're talking about here is when that first intake call comes in from a customer, the person who is typically gathering just basic info. So, name, address, maybe a utility bill, et cetera, is often, or I shouldn't say often, is in some cases, that person is doing what I just did. Here, live in front of you all, is they come into HelioScope, fire in the address, and basically do a quick and dirty design right there. That gives you a couple benefits. One is you can kind of triage the winning ones and send them to, if you want, send them to the better folks on the sales team. And the ones that are going to be more challenges, maybe you send those to the trainees because it's a good excuse for some training opportunities. Also, it might allow you to ask some additional follow-up questions. Based on what you're seeing, you might ask about the condition of the panel, of some trees, etc. And so basically, one of the upshots of this thing being pleasant to use is it's not just a tool for the engineering team or just a tool for the sales team. That in and of itself is unique, but it could actually even be a tool for just the phone screening team. So again, it's trickier to do because you're now asking that person to juggle more during that phone call. But it really can help to help to really maximize your odds of closing, right? If you're especially in days like this where you really do want to do everything you can to make sure the business is growing as quickly as possible, then you want to maximize your probabilities with your best leads, which means getting your best leads to your best closers. So that's kind of the first, interesting twist that we've heard from a few of our users that they're actually doing there to try to, have an overall better sales process. Second one is shifting designs to the frontline sales team in that proposal preparation stage. So once you've got the meeting, once you've got them screened and meeting scheduled, then you're actually, starting to, prepare the materials in advance of the meeting. So in this case, there's a lot of, or there can be a lot of back and forth between sales and engineering. And this is where it depends on the type of system, because especially in commercial, you're going to have a lot more back and forth. But still to some extent in residential. But in a lot of cases, we're seeing our users actually starting to actually front load that work and shift it from the engineering team to the sales team. That's got a few really important aspects there, because one is it's less work for the engineering team to have, to the extent that in a lot of cases, the engineering team tends to be the bottleneck. Then anything you can do to keep work off of your bottleneck in your overall process is a positive for the business. The second, though, is that it also empowers the salesperson. So if that salesperson gets a meeting at the last minute, they don't have to wait for anyone else in the company to be able to turn around the information they need to go show up at that meeting. So so that's really powerful, and probably even more powerful because now you've got a sales team that's both more productive and happier in their job. So this is one of the most powerful aspects of kind of using HelioScope, and it applies to both residential and commercial in slightly different ways, but it's an absolute game changer when you're talking about a commercial system. What it requires is more of a handshake, is more dedication to putting together a list of criteria and rules that the engineering team wants the sales team to follow. So the way this often plays out is, you might end up with a 1 or 2 page list of this is how we do things. And again, if I actually pop back to HelioScope, there's a couple ways that could play out. One would be, so if I start on residential, one might be, hey, these are the modules that we're going to use. So we're going to use a particular module, a particular inverter, et cetera. Actually, if I quickly go off onto a training tangent for any current users, one of the most common things that people aren't doing in HelioScope is really maximizing their use of a profile. So a profile is a way to intelligently set your defaults. So so you would set up a mechanical profile, electrical, and condition set is kind of the loss assumptions, and then you can combine those into a project profile. So basically, we give you a few to start with, but if you have a way of doing business for flat roof versus pitched roof, or a carport, standard carport approach with a particular module, particular inverter, particular settings, definitely you should make sure you update those profiles. And then those will be available when you go to create a new project. Here, let me jump to a new project page. When you create a new project, you'll have those profiles in there so that you can automatically have your default set. So another way to say it is, for anyone that's a current user, if you ever find yourself constantly updating anything in HelioScope, tilt, module, inverter, whatever, definitely use a profile, and you can save yourself, a few minutes a day. Back to this. So the way that handshake is going to go, it's going to be, it's going to be, hey, make sure you use this equipment that we whitelisted. It'll be on a flat roof system. There's often a discussion about how you set the row spacing, and just to point out that some businesses operate in terms of ground coverage ratio. So you could say, hey, we're going to use a particular. Actually, let me not mess this one up, but let me make a copy of that one. So if I just want to mess around, you could change the row spacing by saying, okay, we actually want our target ground coverage ratio to be 0.6. Then let me update the row spacing to calculate based on saying, for every acre of rooftop, I want 0.6 acres of module surface area. Others might think of it in terms of span to rise. Others might think of it in terms of give me no shade on the winter solstice 10 to 2. So again, I'm just touching on the common rules, But what that does is it allows the sales and engineering team to get on the same page, so that when you're in the heat of the moment, the sales team knows exactly what the boundaries are from the engineering team, and the sales team then can put together the file, their designs, their quotes, their pitch for that customer in a way that they don't have to wait for the engineering team to be the bottleneck. The next one is collaboration during the design stage. And this actually goes back to, kind of the way I was doing this live at the first part of the call here, in that one of the most powerful ways of getting buy-in on a particular design, and again, this applies to both residential and commercial, is to get the customer involved in that decision-making process, in that design process. And so some of our customers, in fact, take it to the extreme. Of course, they will have done their homework before they show up, but they don't show up saying, hey, Mr. Homeowner, Mrs. Homeowner, I propose to build you a 5.4 kilowatt system and it's going to produce this much energy, blah, blah, blah. They say, hey, I've got a blank sheet of paper here. Let's sit down together. Let's make sure that I understand your priorities. Let's make sure that I understand your, any kind of constraints. And let's design a system that is going to fit exactly what your needs are. And, essentially design from scratch in the same way that I designed from scratch here. And so doing that on the fly, again, whether it's in the world where we're doing that at the kitchen table or in the world where we're doing that in Zoom, it's something that can be incredibly powerful because, in fact, some even, for those that remember the old Choose Your Own Adventure books, some kind of structure it that way, where you can kind of talk them through step by step and say, hey, for modules, there's a couple options here. Do you prefer to buy domestic, or do you prefer to, buy, high quality import? And again, these are decisions that you're going to make in terms of what whitelisted vendors you want to work with, but you're going to then give the homeowner or business owner a way to be part of that process as you go, so that by the time you get to the finished product, it doesn't feel like something you're sliding across the table to them. It's something that they've had a hand in every step of the way. So that's a really, really powerful way of engaging, especially when you want that higher touch. Of course, the risk there is because they're now part of the design process, you've got to be a little bit more careful with how you talk about it and what things you frame as being options that are available for discussion versus things that they just have to take as a given. So again, it definitely takes skill, and that's why I say a bunch of these they're higher risk but potentially higher reward techniques to try. But that is definitely something that we've seen a number of customers we've seen a number of our customers have pretty good success with, and it really starts with having the sort of processes that let them kind of edit those designs on the fly. In fact, the other thing that actually comes up, believe it or not, is, and it's actually a good example, is let's say that this homeowner has a concern about this neighbor, and they say, this neighbor is going to try to spite me, and I bet they're going to try and take this one tree that's on their property, and they're going to try to replace it with something crazy. You could actually, in this case, say, okay, well, tell you what, let's lock in this one. So here, I'm now going to role play. We'd say, let's lock in this one. Let's make a copy and see what happens, how much worse off we are if that tree is 70 feet tall instead of 30 feet tall. So go to this tree. Let's make it 70 feet tall. Now we can kind of see how much shade we're going to get, a fair amount of morning shade. Save our design. So I'm changing nothing else with the design. And now we can actually say, okay, here's the baseline. Here's the one with the 70-foot tree. If I want to, here I'm going to name my design just to take a little bit of extra time, so that we've got it, looking good. And we can see that, it looks like there's about a 3% impact. So look, 3 percentage points is, it's not nothing, but it's actually not fatal to that system, So it allows you to look at scenarios, both positive and negative, over the course of a conversation. Again, as I'm talking to you and doing the design in the middle of that conversation, a lot of our customers do the same with their end customers, whether it's talking about a neighbor's tree going up, your own tree. You might ask, hey, are we better off if we cut down that one tree? That's always or can be a fraught decision of, do you really want to remove a tree for, for the sake of solar? Like what's the net, what's the actual net benefit there for the earth? But either way, it allows you to at least explore those and kind of quickly put those questions to bed. And then the final thing that I'll mention here, and then I'll kick it over to Desmond, is using value engineering as part of a sales process. And here, you've already seen me do a little bit of it, where it's very kind of easy to take a design and make a copy and make a change. And so in that way, what some of our users do is they actually kind of, I almost put it in quotes, productize a little bit of value engineering. And so this plays out in different ways in residential and commercial, but if you just look at these three examples here, just to kind of talk through what I've done, is to say, hey, look, on a flat roof, we're going to try 3 different tilt angles. So, tilted up higher to get better exposure to the sun, tilted lower, but on the other hand, because it's tilted lower, my same row spacing rule set allows me to squeeze more in. So notice the one with the lower tilt has a higher system size, 118 kilowatts. The one with the higher tilt has smaller system size because those higher tilt modules are going to cast a wider shadow. Here, I'm just going to open this one up so we can see it. The higher tilt modules are going to cast a longer shadow behind them, and therefore you're going to need more spacing between them. So that, just that question of what's the right tilt and racking approach for this system allows you to run really quickly, 3, 5, 10, 15 designs before you show up to a site. And so a few of our users will actually run those various designs. And then, it allows you to be able to talk through the sort of pros and cons. Like in this case, it's a fairly straightforward thing where, hey, tilting up towards the equator means my productivity in terms of kilowatt hours per kilowatt peak is better, which actually kind of makes sense, right? Like you're kind of controlling for shading for the most part, but you're getting better sun angles because you're tilted up more towards the equator. On the other hand, you're also sacrificing system size because you're saying, I want more shade, so you need to space these out further. So on a net energy basis, you're actually producing more energy on that 10-degree tilt system. And with a low cost of hardware, this tends to be what you want to be doing. But anyway, the broader thing is a lot of people will run that analysis, and then that allows you to show up and say, hey, look, we're not just providing you our single best design. We're saying we've run 15, and this is the one that's optimal for you based on some real engineering here. Again, this can often be a differentiator as a way to, set yourselves apart from, if you're in a competitive bid situation and you want to be able to, kind of show that you put in extra legwork that others haven't. So again, all of those are ways in which people are kind of creatively setting up a good kind of customer interaction and ideally a higher probability of a close. Now, if Desmond is ready, I'm going to actually kick it over to Desmond because then he's got some additional best practices and tips for the way to be engaging with those customers and some additional tools to be using for that. So Desmond, if you are ready.
I'm here. Yeah, thanks, Paul. This was awesome. I hope I'm sitting here also with Folsom Labs, like, man, like Paul's also really, great at this, and he's showing you how easy this tool is to use. And I'm going to jump into sharing my screen so you can see a little bit about how we think about excuse me. Sorry, let me share I have a couple of, here we go. All right. So if we think about how those principles can transfer over into the remote world we're in now. And I know that in a lot of ways, that is a theme and topic that's very common given the situation with social distancing. But we wanted to make sure we address it and talk about maybe some, we can call ABCs of remote sales tactics that have helped even me personally sell. I used to come from sales in residential, and for a couple of months I actually sold across the country before COVID was ever a thing, and got a chance to learn some techniques, and in that world have learned from some other people as well who've made it success in doing that. So there are 3 different tactics that we want to talk about today that can really help in your process. They are kind of base knowledge, but they are also if you think about some of the intricacies in there, they could really learn some nuggets here today, how you can improve. So those things include making sure you over communicate in this time, some tricks and tips in the virtual sales call, as well as some ways to make your closing more frictionless, some techniques there. So discussing we go back to our process map. So Paul described some of the different ways HelioScope gets used along the process. And I'm going to describe some overarching themes that are particular to the remote sale. So in that first beginning between that phone screen, the scheduling, and the sales call, there's going to be a lot of communication that has to take place that previously you would have the luxury of being in person to encompass some of that discussion between you and your client. So what the focus of that is to how do you recreate that value of being able to meet face to face while you might not be able to today. So the basic thing here is making sure that those elements that you include are retaining your ability to show intent, next steps, professionalism, and personality all at the same time. So this is an example of emails that even I personally would send out to clients when I was doing remote sales. And there were some key elements that I put into that first outreach. And that includes, let's see, get that going. So the first thing was schedule all interactions. Before doing remote, I took for granted hey, we're going to meet at this time, and it might be on a calendar, but the in-between time periods may not have been scheduled, maybe the phone calls or maybe those things, because there was this overarching theme of, hey, we will know we're going to meet in person at this time. Well, that aspect is not there as of right now, right? So instead, let's go ahead and make sure we schedule all our interactions, and then have the opportunity to introduce yourself in this. So I challenge people to think creatively how you can show your personality and your professionalism in your interactions. They're not going to have the chance to see you in person, shake your hand, see how you dress, all of those things that are underlying parts of the sale. Those elements aren't there. So getting that chance for people to get a feel for who they're working with is super important right now. And so I challenge people to, hey, think of some creative ways. And that's actually like a YouTube video I put together that I would send to people, some clients, just so they can see who I am and some of the other clients I've worked with in the past. And then some other steps is make sure that you have next steps for them at every point. Don't leave. It's super easy to leave your client waiting for you or waiting for them, especially when you're in person. But in this time with remote, everything has to continue to flow. So make sure that you have some clear next steps at each point along the sales process. And then as you send them content, make sure to track it. So I'm going to show you some examples, some tools and things to use to encompass these elements. So calendar invites. Now it's great to say, hey, we've agreed at this time, but there's nothing like seeing a meeting on your calendar, right? So imagine all the things that you're doing remote. Everybody at their home is doing the same thing. So if we keep everything word of mouth only, it's going to be very easy to forget stuff. Especially when people are always in front of maybe their computer, always distracted by the next thing, and their days aren't broken up the same way they used to be. So getting on their calendar is huge. Make sure that you try and push them to calendar invites and schedule everything there, so you feel they also feel the professionalism from you, and then you also get their intent as well, that, hey, they're agreeing to this timetable and they've got it visually for themselves on a calendar. When you're sending them these emails, so you're sending them content, it's a great idea to make sure that this content is trackable. So there are some tools, including ShowPad, this is an example of ShowPad there, as well as HighSpot, where you can upload your content, whether that be your sales brochures or maybe some content videos, or whenever you send a proposal over, those things that that your user, you want them to see. Well, while you might not be able to see them look at it right there in person, if you're sending it to them over time, you can track what they're looking at, how often they're looking at it. And those aspects uh, are, are great to have, and it helps you gauge that temperature of that customer and to make sure that they're really into purchasing a system. Let's see. And then another thing that I found very helpful and what sometimes will take for granted is using other communication options. So if you're not already, I'm assuming people text your clients, but if you aren't, make sure you do it. Text messages get opened at a much higher rate than emails do. You can imagine your inbox right now. And if you're like me, sometimes, especially my personal inbox, it might pile up with the many different emails that come in. And so if you're, what I found was that if I send an email with most of the information, and then maybe a simple text message that would say, hey, how are you doing? Just making sure that you're aware that I sent you an email. Just something as simple as that would almost double the email open rate that I was seeing. So just ways to make sure that you're touching base with your clients as much as possible, because you never know who you're working with and what their preferred methods are or what they'll be looking at. So just keep all the lines open. And another tool that works for texting, especially if you need to send out maybe a new announcement. So you might have email blasts that you open, that you send, but you can also use a tool such as simple texting to send blast text out for any announcements that you have for maybe a rebate or a sale or a drop in price or something like that that you want to get across to your clients. So that's the over communication aspect. Also, let's talk about the virtual sales call. Paul went over a lot of those aspects, and I'm going to also touch on a little bit when it comes to the financials and proposals as well. So one of those things is, again, you're trying to replace that trust. And what I found was a big thing. There are a lot of questions that clients may not voice. Is, hey, how are you making sure? How could you really know what's going on with the system if you haven't stepped foot on my property? And HelioScope is a tool that has so much capability that will allow you to give them those accurate estimates and provide that trust. So actually, I want to jump over into HelioScope right now. Let me jump there very quickly here. Okay. So what I'm actually going to do is you'll see I'm back on helioscope.com. This is the main page here. So if you're new to HelioScope, when you first log in, this is something that you'll see in a list of projects. Paul is actually able to share projects with me. So what some people and teams might do is, if you have a main designer, that designer may do most of the legwork and then share the project with the sales team. And then that sales team can then go in and make any adjustments in the field, as Rhonda was talking about, as well as now we have a beta for our proposals and financial analysis that they may look into as well. So this, for those who have been using HelioScope, this is a different extension and something that you can get access to today per request. Make sure to afterwards, when we have a reach out, we'll give you the opportunity to fill out a survey to get access to this. But you'll see your list of projects here. And in this section here, you can actually go into more than just the physics. You can go into the financials as well. So I'll jump into that project that Paul was working on. And I'm seeing this design here that he created. And what I could do is, I could work with the customer and ask them a couple of questions, right? Like I might say, okay, let's just assume the worst case scenario, which is I never got a utility bill from this person, right? Or I never got full clarification. Well, the great thing is that you can kind of come into the the sale with some things in mind. So if you have a feel for at least their utility company, maybe you don't know the exact rates, but you can always use a flat rate. So you can type this in, and if you have net metering, you can apply that there. The other thing you could do is you can select different rates. So just for example, we have a couple of rates in our database now, and we'll continue to fill them out as per request. But for example, you can use, let's say PG&E, right? So those are different ways that you can use actual utility rates, or you can just model a simple flat rate. And let's say you're sitting with the client and you want to figure out what their consumption profile is. So you can come into here. If they have, you can't upload XML green button data, but otherwise, for the most part, people are going to come in here, edit their assumptions, and then just put in each month, as you might be used to using tools today with this similar aspect. So you can come in here, input their months of data. We can even assume, for example, maybe they've only been in their property for a certain amount of time and only have a couple of months of data. Well, we also have usage profiles for different building types. So you can see here, this is based upon a weather file location that can be selected. And then you can say, hey, if you're with a residential profile, you can say these are our common users in that area. This is based upon NREL data. So here's would be a base user. You can see how low users profile would look. So maybe it's a little bit flatter in this area. And then high users may be higher in the winter months. So it would just balance that pattern that you would see between different users. So you could assume that, hey, if they have a pretty normal utility rate, you can use a base, fill in these months, and you'll see here after I hit done, HelioScope will project the rest of the usage for the rest of the year, even if you don't have those actual months to work with. So it gives you some flexibility there to continue to provide a proposal, even if you don't have every single bit of information that we all know can be difficult to achieve at times. So let's take a look at, I'm going to also add a what we call a financial configuration. So you'll probably come in here and have something built out. These are all all customizable, but I'll show you an example of let's say a cash purchase. Let's change the price there. Okay. You can add incentives and other measures as well. But let's say you're sitting with your customer, and now you want to talk with them about this process that they're going through. So in a virtual walkthrough, you might come into your designer, similar to how Paul was discussing, and just confirm some details that maybe your engineer put into place. Like say, hey, listen, we saw these trees here, this locations, and here are the heights. And you might ask them, hey, do you think you're going to keep these trees? And remember how we talked about the neighbor that might add a tree or might spike them? Well, maybe they had a change of heart, and you say, hey, my neighbor's decided that I'm going to cut down the tree, that they're going to cut down the tree, right? Or I've had crazy clients that like, I'll go over there with a chainsaw myself. You probably heard all kinds of crazy stuff when doing this, but that might be a case, right? Like this tree is going to go down, so you can delete the tree and say, okay, well, we're going to go ahead and redo the simulation now that we know that tree is not going to be there. So here you are in the sales call. You're doing this over Zoom like we're doing right now. You resimulate for them and say, okay, well, let's see what the aspect is going to be. What's going to be the change in the energy output and those other metrics, right? So for the most part, you might be in here, you're focused on the financials. Well, you can see some other metrics here on the side as well. Things like your net present value, internal rate of returns, those aspects. And then you can jump straight into a proposal. So I'll show you an example here. We come into, see, for example, here's a proposal. So this is a proposal we have pre-built for you, but you can customize all of these elements. Mind you, this was built all in HelioScope's proposal building tool. And you can really tell your story in this and get across all the things that you want to, and walk with the customer through the aspect of the actual sale, right? And talk about these things that may matter more to them than just the energy values and those things. They might want to talk about, wait, well, how much is my, how much is this price of the electricity going to go up, right? Like, and talk about how outdated, electricity common sources are today, right? So all of these things that you're probably using in proposals today, you can build this all in the tool. You can walk this through with them online over remote, and then very simply, you can print this to PDF and you can send it through different channels. So that's just a quick rundown of that tool and how people can utilize this today. I did see a question about green button data into the model, and as of today, if you do have XML files, you can't upload them here. So most green button data stuff will work by just clicking that button and then uploading, and you can have that pattern there. But it's very particular to that. We're trying to we'll be looking into adding some more file types to that. But let's jump back over to PowerPoint, because I want to talk a little bit about closing in remote. And this is something that I found to be quite a different aspect than it would be when you're at the table. So like we're aware, right? So closing, especially with sales in solar, and you're sitting at the table, a lot rides on that first meetup, or maybe a secondary meetup, and sitting there looking at the client and shaking their hand and having that confidence in you as a person and all those things. And so that aspect is hard to replicate when you're across a computer screen at times. So how can you transform, and how can you then create a process that will give a client that confidence and also allow them to feel the close without an unwarranted amount of friction? And so what that comes down to is what I found to work, and what some are finding to work in the remote sale, is that a pressure close might not work the same. It doesn't really work when you're sitting at the table and I say, hey, can I have your business, right? You will ask for the sale, but that physical presence isn't there. So one of the things that I found to work was to incorporate a couple of these elements. One includes giving a deadline. That's something that in a case, some people think your offer in solar is forever. I challenge people to say, hey, whatever it's going to be, give some type of deadline, whether that just means that, you might expect pricing to change, or maybe it's a promotion. Some type of deadline is going to let that client know that, hey, listen, this isn't just I'm putting this out here and it can sit forever kind of thing. And then some of those tools that are you can use in your emails. There's this thing called a Centric countdown timer. I found that tool and actually would use it in those emails, and it would count down. So every time that client came back to that email to review some more stuff, they'll see the clock has ticked down. So it's a great tool to really get that point across. It gives that sense of urgency that is otherwise hard to replicate when you're not there at the table. Another thing is send all closing material right away. So where you could leave maybe a portfolio of information, or leave some type of physical leave behind with a person at their property, you'll need to do that in some way. So similar to how you're sending them content that is like brochures, once you have their proposal, once you have their financing options available, send it immediately. Get it out to them as soon as possible, their contract as soon as possible. What I found was that people will make up their mind and they will sign a deal when you least expect it. So you'll have and this is a third point here, schedule your closing call. So you can have a time to say, hey, we're going to talk at this point. I found that a lot of times, if I gave them all the material that we discussed, that sometimes they'll actually sign the contract before the closing call. They'll just make up their mind and just go for it, right? So you don't want to hold it back till the closing call. Give that person, when they have that itch to move forward, have everything there ready and available for them to do that. So some other tips in closing, there at times will be gaps between your communication after the close. Again, that at the table aspect of like everything rides at this moment isn't there as in the same way. So you kind of have to keep them warm at times, right? You'll want to keep sending them some relevant information, but not pestering them like, hey, how's it going? How's it going? Like, you want to have some things in your back pocket just to keep it fresh on their mind consistently. So, you can send them stuff that's going on, some newsworthy items, maybe some more base facts that in detail that you wouldn't necessarily go over in the sales call. And then again, that's what I talked about, sending your contract. So many of you may be using this already. DocuSign, other electronic sign aspects. You can upload your proposals from the HelioScope beta and or contract language, send it through DocuSign, and have it there waiting for your client to sign off on. And you'll be surprised how often they'll sign it right before you expecting the actual close to take place. So that is the basis for our solar sales process, especially given this time, what we've seen clients do, and also given the aspect that we're remote as well. So there's some best practices for HelioScope, some best practices to incorporate our ABCs of your remote sale. And this, together we find that can drive a lot of success today. So we have some time open for questions now.